I'm excited today because we have our good friends and partners at CUNA Mutual joining us to talk about creating an unfair boardroom advantage. Today on the call, we have Randy Fuss and Chris Graves, Director of Strategic Accounts from CUNA here, and we also have RPAG's Retirement Services, Jeff Cheshire, joining us today. So it is my pleasure to first introduce Chris Graves.
All right, thanks, Leah, and thanks everyone for joining today. As Leah mentioned, my name is Chris Graves, and I'm the Director of Strategic Accounts here at CUNA Mutual Group. And as we head into Thanksgiving and then the holidays, it signals that we're right smack in the middle of peak selling season in the retirement plan business. So the timing could not be better for today's discussion on creating an unfair boardroom advantage. But first, I wanted to thank our partners at RPAG for hosting this event and including us in their webinar series. Most of you in the audience already know Jeff Cheshire, the giant he is in the industry, and the focus he's had for a long time now on finding great thought leadership and value-add content and delivering it to plan advisors throughout the years. So Jeff, we're extremely pleased to be working with you on this and other topics. A lot of you may not know that this is part of our bigger overall effort to utilize more of CUNA's Retirement Consultant Institute content and deliver a lot of those tools and ideas to RPAG members throughout this year and hopefully the coming years. So, but before I get to Randy Fuss, who is our presenter today, I wanted to remind all of you about just some basic information on CUNA Mutual Group for some context. We're a mission-based financial services company that's here to help hardworking Americans achieve financial security. And here in Total Retirement Solutions, we're a small market provider serving plans at or under $25 million in assets. We offer both unbundled and bundled administration models with a big focus on working with local TPAs for over 6 years now. We support not only K plans, but also ERISA 403Bs, defined benefit and cash balance, governmental 457s, and non-qualified plans, all focusing on the small plan market, which is where we think there's an abundance of new plan opportunities for financial advisors and TPAs alike. Now, we have a lot of confidence in our platform and our services, but we'd rather focus on differentiating ourselves from other firms by offering value way beyond product solutions. And that's really where Randy and our institute come in. So Randy Fuss is our resident practice management coach. And in that role, he's the chief creator of the content in our institute. More importantly, though, he kind of takes this information and in addition to presenting it in a lot of venues, he trains our sales team in how to deliver this type of content effectively to local clients like you and our audience. Randy's a registered corporate coach and also a former financial advisor, which allows him to offer a really kind of genuine perspective to the material. So with that, I can't wait to see Randy and Jeff get going on today's content. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Cheshire. And Jeff, go ahead and take it away, sir.
Thanks, Chris. So before we get going, one item to build off of what Chris said is we've done a good bit of work with Randy in the past, and Chris says he's a coach. I'll say he's a guru. This is an area that he lives in and has really good concepts all around how to help our members become more effective and efficient in their activities. And we have some recordings that are on the RPAG dashboard. So if you go to the video learning series, there you'll see some columns on the left, and one of them is practice management. And we've got 3 videos loaded there of past content, conversations I've had with Randy, some content that I've delivered based on some of the things I've learned from Randy. So feel free to go check any of that out. That's all really good stuff. So what we're going to do here today is Randy and I are just going to chat for the next 30 minutes about some concepts of how to step up your game when you are in a closing situation, a boardroom, just any kind of a sales situation. And at the end of those about 30 minutes, we're going to give you a call to action. And then if you need to jump at that point, that's fine. But we're going to have probably another 15 minutes of what we're calling bonus time to really kind of talk about what happens when things get real in those situations. And also, I want to talk about what this is and what it isn't. So this is not math class. We're not teaching you equations that are, once you learn them, then you're just going to be able to walk in and improve your effectiveness. It's an art. And the more you practice it, the better you're going to get. So the concepts that we're going to be discussing today, get out, try them. Get out on the ice a little bit, see what feels good, what works, maybe what doesn't work, and just continue to work on your game. So also, we're not going to try to make you an expert in this field at this time. We're going to want to get your wheels turning on some things that you might want to think about, that if you're able to open up a new paradigm in the way that you view your interactions with folks who you're selling to, it might increase your effectiveness. And as Chris mentioned, there are 14 folks around the country that CUNA has trained and Randy has trained on how to really help you get in the weeds, roll up your sleeves, whatever, however you want to put that, but to get better at it. So with that, Randy, what is Boardroom Advantage in a nutshell?
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. What is Boardroom Advantage? Well, the bottom line is to help you win more plan business. But if you take a look at the foundation that's underneath that, the main premise is that there's 4 different personality types that both the buyer and the seller exhibit in some way, shape, or form. Now, this probably doesn't sound unique because there's a lot of different programs out there. Colby, Myers-Briggs, Social Style, DISC, they all have the same basic premise. And if the buyer and the seller have the same style, well, it means that the chances of success are really good. If they're not the same style, that's where things really get off the rails. And it's really up to the seller to adapt. Now, that's not unique. That's, again, if you've been in financial services, you've been through one of those 2 programs, and I'm sure you have as well, Jeff. The unique layer that we've created is bringing it to the qualified retirement plan space. Because guess what? The buyer is not an individual or a couple. The individual is now part of a committee where there could be 2, 3, 4, 5 people that are now the buyers. And the challenge on the financial advisor's part is, how do you navigate through 2, 3, 4, 5 personalities and win the business? And really what today is all about is to arm you with a couple of tools and resources that can help you win your unfair share of the business.
Well, so someone may be asking themselves, or saying to themselves and then asking, I've got this pretty figured out. I do all right. Why should I even care about this? Well, while there may be some circumstances where you are on your game and you walk in and you're very effective, there are going to be, to some degree, those situations where the competition is tight and the difference between winning and losing can be very small. And in those situations, we want you to be armed with as much knowledge and as many tools as is possible. And no matter how much you prepare for a meeting, there are times when you walk into a meeting and stuff is different. And there are things you haven't accounted for. You need to be able to know, okay, who is having a bad day? Who is new to this room that I haven't encountered before? What is going on that somehow I didn't plan for? And what Randy and I are going to be chatting about today is content that is designed to help you in those instances tilt the deck in your favor. So Randy, when we talk about, you try to plan as much as you can plan, you still have that wild card factor. And when we were chatting yesterday, you kind of hit me with a little bit of an interesting trivia question about plans. What is that?
Okay, this is a very unofficial survey, folks. So make note and give us an answer. Who came up with the famous quote that starts with, "Everybody has a plan"? Now here's your choices: Winston Churchill, Mike Tyson, or Winnie the Pooh. Now we're not going to run the Jeopardy music on you. So Winnie the Pooh's famous quote was, "I had a plan to do nothing today, but they say nothing is impossible." Now run that through your brain a couple of times and you get a good chuckle out of it, but clearly it was not Winnie the Pooh. Winston Churchill said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And actually Winston Churchill and Ben Franklin both said that. Mike Tyson, heavyweight boxer, said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that's exactly what can happen in the boardroom.
Absolutely. All right. Well, anything else before we get into the dynamics?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add one other thing, that when it comes to preparation and planning and not being taken by surprise, the unique ability that you have in the qualified plan space is that you might have the opportunity to meet with a prospect 2, 3, 4 times. The ability to go out and observe, in some respects, collect some unofficial intel. And that can be very different to put you in a situation that you're really not being taken by surprise. But with that, let's give you the first step in this process. Okay? And the first step is identifying who you are. And we're talking specifically as a seller. Now, I'm a registered corporate coach. I'm certified to do DISC training. It's just one of those programs that we're mentioning before. And DISC is an acronym, D-I-S-C. Right, I'm going to run through all four and give you some quick descriptors on each four. And I want you to just in your brain to sort of get some thoughts to think, I kind of resemble that one. I maybe not so much resemble that one. Okay, so let's start with the D. The D is for dominance. And the dominant individual is somebody that's a very my way or the highway, take charge type of individual. They really crave control. That's their base need. And in the sales process, they're actually very good presenters. They're very good classic closers. If they have one challenge, they tend to be a little bit overbearing. Let's just put it that way. Right? That's, again, the dominant individual. We get over to influence. This is the I. And the influencer is this very energetic, very animated individual. They've got a different need, and that's to be noticed. And in this particular personality type, they're also very dynamic presenters. But if they have one shortfall, they're called the shiny metal object people. They're constantly squirrel. Let's just say a little bit more distracted. Now let's move to the S. The S is for steadiness. Now the steady individual is the more calming influence. They're all about relationships and security and sincerity. And their base need is they really don't like a lot of change in their world. Now, what their core strength is that they ooze trust. This is an individual that just really, at the end of the day, oozes some trust. If they have any challenges, probably that they're not very proactive, right? They tend to be a little bit more on the passive side. That's the S. So far we got dominance, influence, steadiness, and the final one, the C, is for compliance. And the compliant individual is very about facts and figures. Right. And when you take a look at their base need is to be right. Now, from a sales standpoint and a strength standpoint, especially in the qualified retirement plan space, their core strength is clearly knowledge, because there's certainly a lot of regs and rules out there. If they have a shortfall, it's tend that they get a little overanalyzed in situations and maybe want to actually prove that they're right in a situation where there's no upside to proving they're right. So again, that's the four. We got dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And what we're going to do right now is put up a more official poll. And we're going to ask you, which of these four types are you? Again, your choices. We have the dominance, the influence, the steadiness, and the compliance.
Good spread there.
We got an amazing spread.
And if you haven't voted yet, come on, just click it. Okay, I guess got what we're gonna get. So anybody out there, if there was a fifth choice that was all of the above, do you think you might have fit that? It's almost like reading a fortune cookie. No matter what you read, you can see yourself in it. Randy, is there a label for someone who kind of thinks they're a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your comments about just one word, and that word is chameleon.
Okay. So chameleon being someone who can kind of shapeshift and be whatever they need in whatever situation, whether they're the buyer or the seller. I would imagine, especially among the more successful folks who might be in our audience, there may be a high propensity of them to think, well, for sure, I'm a chameleon. How many folks out there, Randy, in your experience, either think that they're a chameleon, but actually are a chameleon?
I'd say there's about a third that don't even understand the concept of chameleon, a third that think they are or not, and less than a third that actually are successful at being chameleons. It's probably even much lower than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for folks who are not chameleons, which is the vast majority of us, this information is all the more important, right? So where do we take the conversation from here?
Well, there's one thing that I think is rather interesting in terms of these descriptors that I gave you. And that's the fact that there is some fundamental thought process that they're all kind of on islands by themselves, that you're clearly this style over the others. And I'm going to share something right now that really kind of will share that there's some common ground, right? So what we've shared so far is the dominance, the influence, the steadiness, and the compliance. And the survey was fascinating that we're almost split a quarter. We're just off slightly on that, right? But the dominant and the influencers are both extroverts. The influence and the steady are both a very kind of people-oriented, favorable. Steady and compliance both have a set of activities that are a little bit more introverted, and the compliance and the dominance are really kind of task-oriented. Now, what's kind of interesting, and the reason I put this up, is that what does the dominant or the steady have in common? Or what does the influence and the compliance have in common? So I want everybody on the call right now who answered the poll, and even those that did not, okay, to just think for a second of what your answer was. And we actually have a situation which is called an oil and water. And that's directly across from you. And that's someone that you and them do not see eye to eye. So Jeff, if I was just to ask you for a second, is there one of these four styles that you exhibit more than the others?
Well, it's been probably 20 years since I've taken this analysis, Randy, and I probably would need to take it again. So I have no idea what my official results were, but I would guess it would be somewhere between steadiness and influence.
Yeah. So if Jeff was to lean towards the influence, what it would suggest is that directly across from that is the compliant individual that they don't see eye to eye. And that's where this biggest adaptation comes place. So Jeff, knowing that we have this sort of oil and water situation, what are your thoughts? Do you do anything with it? Do you just sort of ignore it? What would you do in that situation?
Well, as I was kind of thinking through our session and our time today, an analogy that is pretty relevant at the moment came to me, and it's politics. And so if everybody's on, and occupies some space on the spectrum between conservative and liberal and all the different labels that are out there. And if you're in a room with someone who is opposite of yours, but you need something from them, you've got some choices on how you're going to approach this person, right? You can either try to identify where they are and meet them where they are and see if you can accomplish what we're looking for, or we can just stomp our feet and bang our hand on the table and say, I'm right and you're wrong, and this is what we're going with. How does that align with what we're talking about?
Yeah, I got to give you a little bit of a different lens. My lens was that I opened up an advisory practice already certified to do DISC, right? I was the DISC king, and I could analyze my prospects coming through the door. I'm a high I, so my oil and water is those high Cs. They kind of drive me a little batty, asking like irrelevant questions. But I was not in a situation that I could refuse service to the Cs. I could not afford to look at those prospects that had several hundreds of thousands of dollars in their accounts and say, I really don't want to do business with you because you're going to drive me nuts. And fast forward 3.5 years later, I have 30 clients that are Cs, and every single one of them drove me batty, right? But it's kind of a necessary evil that you've got to figure out a way to adapt and do something with that. All right, so let me kind of share with you where we're going to go with this now, is that when we're discussing now clients and prospects, what I mentioned to you that's so unique about this program is that it's qualified retirement plan business, and your prospect and your client is not necessarily just an individual or a couple, it's a business. And what I'm going to put up right now is a backdrop that really kind of epitomizes what this is all about. And from the standpoint of a business, believe it or not, there's actual businesses that display the four dispersed personality types, right? So we're going to spend a couple of minutes on this one because this is a big part of really helping you, kind of sharpen your craft a little bit, is to look at these different scenarios and ask yourself, are you going to walk in with the same exact playbook every single time? Or might there be some different approaches for different audiences? Right. So let's start with the high D. We talked about this dominant, this take charge individual. which some of you are as sellers. On the buy side, could you imagine walking into a group of attorneys? And let's just call them sharks are us, right? So that's kind of epitome of the dominant type of scenario you could walk into. Now, it's not just industry. It could also be one particular position in the company. And I would say that the CEO is the most likely individual to exhibit those high D type of tendencies. So what do we need to know in that situation? We do need to move very, very quickly, and we need to get to the bottom line very quickly, right? This is not a situation where you're going to pull out your 33-page deck and walk through it cover to cover and expect them to be really engaged, right? Let's slip over to the I, the epitome of the influencer. Think of going to a car dealership, right? You got this very relaxed atmosphere and you're just kind of mucking it up and having a lot of fun. Well, the interesting thing about being at a finals presentation at a car dealership is they don't even think it's a finals presentation. They just think it's a big party that you're having for an hour and a half, right? So sometimes the focus needs to be on keeping the meeting focused and making sure that we can find some ways to make things easy for them, right? Let's move down to the S, because this is going to be very, very different. The steadiness. Think of every nonprofit that's out there, right? It's going to be a very, very different setting. You might be in the lunchroom, right? But you're going to have some very patient individuals that are going to be really listening and hanging on every word you say. So it's very important to try to get them talking, ask some good questions, and to see if we can get some engagement. And know that they're not going to be making a decision anytime soon where the attorneys have made a decision within 30 seconds. And finally, we get over to the high C, and that's the epitome of technology, right? So in this type of setting, we know that they need facts and figures in every single white paper that is going to really come with any of those pages of your 33-page PowerPoint document. So that's just a quick synopsis. You can see 4 very, very different situations.
Okay, and we were talking previously about a situation where you walk into a boardroom and there may be a new HR person or a new whatever position, and they're looking to make their stamp. And that led into a broader discussion. What is the impact of someone who may be new to the role? Because we view, okay, we're going into the boardroom and it's a whole bunch of people that's the them, and then we're the us, and we tend to view them as a monolith, almost as a group. But that's not the case. Not only are the individuals different, but how can someone who may be new in their role be even more different?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, the answer is a little bit different for all 4. Let's just say that there's going to be an extension extreme version of what their main personality is, right? So if we're dealing with the high D, which again could be an attorney, but really think about that CEO for a second, their base need is about being in control, right? So as a new CEO, they might really want to put their stamp on it and say, I really got to put my foot down and make my presence known here, right? So there's going to be this like exhibiting, I'm in charge, right? You move over to the high I, and by the way, this could be the head of sales, perhaps. They're really not going to be much a threat. They're, if anything, the high I who likes to be noticed is going to really want to be making their presence known, but they're not very good at listening anyways. So I think that's one of the 4 that you can kind of discount. Now, S, the steadiness, the nonprofit, this is actually where HR quite often is. And the steadiness is really kind of about security and stability. They tend to be a little bit on the quiet side. So believe it or not, the high S in a new role is probably not going to be very vocal, right? They're going to want to kind of fit in with the team. And then finally, you got the high C, and this is the analytical one. It could be a CFO, right? Brand new CFO. And a high C always wants to be right. So by God, if they're a new CFO, what they're going to tell you is I'm the smartest one in the room. And they're going to be very, very adamant about that.
So customizing this to our retirement landscape, we're going to have some folks on the call today who have a foot in personal wealth management as well as on the retirement side. And on the personal wealth management side, I would see most of those clients being D's and I's. They're folks who have been very successful in what they've done. They're the CEO, they're the person that's the head of sales. But how is it different on the retirement buying side from the wealth management side, Randy?
In terms of the personality of the financial advisor? Yeah, it's
The
actually a little bit
audience, the
the
audience.
audience. Mhm.
Yeah.
So from an audience perspective, you're talking about the folks that are on the call right now?
I'm sorry, from the people in the boardroom we're talking to, how does that spread differ from the retail side that is mainly DNI?
Oh, gotcha. We're going to see a pretty big difference is that in this particular industry, there's going to be a very large prevalence of the high S and the high C type of personalities in there, right? Because where it's a bit different is that with companies, you got a head of compliance, you got a head of HR, right? And these personality types are very different than what typically you would see on the retail side, which is primarily, as you mentioned before, the D's and the I's.
Okay. Let's talk about R2D2.
All right.
Maybe not R2D2.
Hey, we're not going to be talking Star Wars today, but let's call it the final sauce, the final formula for Boardroom Advantage. It's called C2D2.
Okay.
Now, C2, this is actually going to be a Star Wars sequel coming out. C2. What is C2? Cues and clues. What does that mean? Well, first of all, we got to just acknowledge that you're not always going to call it right in terms of walking into a boardroom and be able to peg their personalities. Not that we want to label people, but that's exactly what we're trying to do. They can be identified by the cues and clues. Cues, these are verbal. Just in the way that they talk, you might be able to listen and get some verbal cues and identify what personality traits they're exhibiting. The other part is the clues. Clues, I just got to look around. What do I see? And just by listening and looking, you can now develop a little bit of an idea of, I think this person's a high D. I think this company's it's a high S. The D part of it. Yeah, go ahead.
So the cues, things we're listening for, that falls right in line with what we're talking about. What about the clues? What kind of things do we see that might clue us in a little bit on what kind of environment we're in?
I'll give you one of the most fascinating ones is you could actually go into anybody's office and you could look around and you could figure out their personality. Right? A D is going to have pictures of them with a former president. A high I is going to have pictures of them in Cabo San Lucas with a big marlin. The S is going to have pictures of them doing their service for their boys club or girls club or whatever. And the high C is going to have a bunch of charts, right? So that's just one example of just having the ability to visit a premise, look around at that individual's office and be able to say, oh, this person is a high C. I can see it right there on the walls.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So the D part of it is the do's and don'ts. And as we get into bonus time in this next 15 minutes, we're actually going to take you into the boardroom a little bit and give you some thoughts on, what are some of the do's and don'ts. But let me kind of back up for a second, is that when you take a look at the C2 and the D2 in its entirety, it's listen and look before you speak. All right. So when we're talking about a boardroom advantage, that's do the intel. Just look around, listen. Maybe it's not right in that boardroom that day. Some of it might have been done ahead of time. And now you've been able to formulate a strategy of here's some of the approaches I need to take. Here's some of the things I need to do. Here's some of the pitfalls, the don'ts, some of the things I shouldn't do based upon what I think is comprised of the group.
Okay, great.
So
we're at our 30 minutes. What is our call to action going to be, Randy, before we move into bonus time?
Well, I just wanted to share with you that, as Jeff mentioned at the top of the hour, we have 14 external RVPs they're very adept at this type of material. And there are some tip cards and a flash card that can help you with some of the strategies we've already discussed, including the do's and don'ts, which we're about to get into. But Jeff, these are also going to be available on the RPAG site as well. So I certainly would encourage you to reach out to us and know that there's some great tools that can help you form that unfair advantage.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get some bonus time.
All right. So Jeff, what would you like to do in boardroom time? You want to actually go into the boardroom? What would you like to do?
Well, before we go into the boardroom, I would like to hear a little more about those 2 Ds. What am I doing and don'ting?
Okay. So in terms of the do's and the don'ts, and we're going to just again walk through these 4 and give you some thoughts on them. Pull this up. Okay, let's start with the D's. Okay. You all seeing this okay?
Yep.
All right, so this is specifically for that dominant individual. Now, for the dominant individual, do move quickly. You absolutely do need to be moving very, very quickly. It's necessary that you are very prepared, sticking to the facts. One of the things I find interesting is to give alternatives. And what do I mean by that? It's like, well, if with a high D you say, I recommend we do X, they're going to say, like hell, we're going to do that. I'm in control. But if you offer up A or B and say these are both valid solutions, now it's like you're in control. You have the ability to kind of make that final decision on what they want to do. By all means, know that you're there to solve some problems, and quite often you're trying to answer what we call the what question, right? They're going to be asking something as simple as, what's the bottom line here? All right. The don'ts. Don't waste time. Please don't try to build rapport. I swear to gosh, if you go into a group of high Ds and you say, how are you doing today? They will rip your head off. Like, how am I doing today? Jeff, do you really want me to tell you how my day is gone? Being I got my ass chewed out by a judge at 9 o'clock this morning. It's like, I'm just trying to make idle talk. They don't care about your opinions or testimonials. And be careful about dwelling on the details. It's something that's really something to think about. And by the way, these slides, we'll make sure to make them available as well. I'm going to drop out for a quick second on the share and see if I can get this thing working properly. No, can't get it to do it. All right, let's move to the next one, which is the influence. Okay, so think about that car dealership for a second. Okay, just go back to that for a second. We got to socialize. They might even make you walk through an RV. We have one of our wholesalers that had to walk through a bunch of RVs before the meeting even started. We got to figure out how to direct things back to business. So do provide some testimonials and opinions. They like that. But do summarize, right? This is not an individual that's going to want to hear a bunch of detailed blather. And do follow up, because they're, they might, Jeff, a high I might actually say, hey, I like you, I want to work with you. You're like, wow, that was the easiest sale of my life, right? It's what's called a false yes. They say that to everybody.
Would politicians fall into this category typically?
Yes, absolutely.
Because what this is reminding me of is for anybody who's been to the DC fly-in for Napa, this is the exact instructions that they give us before we go and meet with our representatives or their staffs.
Exactly. So we got to hold them to the follow-up and know that we got to answer the who question. Who else is doing this besides us? Because they like the popular choice, right? The don'ts, don't dwell on the facts or details. They don't care about it. We can't stick strictly to business. We can't dictate the conversation. The eyes do like talking a lot, but by all means, don't lose focus. Now, things are going to change a little bit when we get to the steady Eddie. Okay, when we get down to steadiness, and we're going to see change pretty dramatically, is that we just got to slow everything down, right? Remember the high D said, like, give me the answer. And now they're just sitting there patiently and like, we're going to walk through all 33 pages, right? Right. So we got to kind of slow things down, ask some questions, do some listening. Sincerity, patience is a virtue here. They don't like change. They really don't like change. So we've got to give logical reasons for the change. And sometimes that leads to the why question. Why are we doing this? We got to give them some logical reasons of why this change. Well, because our plan right now sucks. It's got to be something a little bit more detailed than that. And on the don't side, be careful about forcing the agenda, giving false, shallow answers, interrupting, overpromising. Bad mouthing's never good, but it's really not good here. And closing too fast sounds kind of interesting, but from a don't standpoint, there's no nonprofit that ever thinks that this is the finals presentation. This is part of a lengthy process. Okay. Finally, we get to the compliance. And from that standpoint, think of that tech company. Boy, things really slow down to molasses here, right? We've got to be very direct, facts, figures, proof, pros and cons, answer the how question, which is how does this work? How is this going to happen? And on the don't side, they as well are not into the rapport building, right? So we don't need to waste time on that, giving opinions, but we can't gloss over details. And do bear in mind, I'm right, you're wrong. That's where they're at right now, right? So you got to make sure that the information we give is correct. And by certain, if there's any incomplete answers, they're going to want to have more complete answers.
Okay. So we've got our do's and don'ts. And personally, I'm a guy who likes to prepare for worst case scenarios. So what is my nightmare when I walk into a boardroom, and how am I ready to face that?
Is everybody ready for their worst nightmare? Because right now, I'm just kind of fearful of the people on the call right now, that they're probably a little shell shocked going like, I'm confused here, right? Yeah, it's a lot to digest. And I think that Jeff said it very properly. This is not a math formula that you're trying to figure out. This has got a lot of art involved, but at the end of the day, we're trying to help you have that unfair advantage and deliver things properly. Here's your worst nightmare. They're all in the boardroom at the same time. Right? So let's suppose that you've met two of them before. And let's suppose that you walk in to this. And I know that the last couple of years has been a lot of virtual, but we're certainly getting back to physical boardrooms. And you have a D, an I, an S, and a C. Hey, Jeff, can I even remotely ask you what you're thinking about doing right now as the advisor?
Well, it seems like you want to, if you can't meet all the needs at once, go in order. So Mr. Dominance is probably going to be the shot caller. So I probably want to tailor my comments to him, right?
Yeah, actually, the answer I was looking for is that you're gonna actually do a 180 and run out of the room. Okay, that's not an option. So yeah, there's some natural belief around. Well, obviously the D is the decision maker, so make sure they're getting lots of love and attention. I get all that. I really love the slide that's up right now because there are some caricatures that are involved, and what you often have with that high D is this scowl. If you've ever met somebody that's a high D, that's a decision maker, head of a law firm, your first impression is probably like, they don't like me. It's just like the intimidating stare, scowl factor. Now, interestingly enough, the placement is maybe where they're at. The D is going to be down the table, but probably sitting at the end of the table, staring directly back at you, because that's their seat. They're in control. Now, what's interesting, and let me kind of peck at each of these in a little bit of order, right? The influencer is not paying attention, right? So the fact that we have this in a group setting right now would suggest that this is somebody who's the head of sales, and they already looked down at their Facebook feed, and they had a little chuckle looking at that app, right? So they're just like out here in left field. But I want to focus on each of the four for just a second. Right? Because when it comes to that influencer, the influencer is all about making it easy for me, right? So if I had that influencer in a boardroom by themselves, isolated, it would be you're going to make it easy for me. You're going to do everything for me. In this group setting, they have very little bearing, right? So in this situation, take that I and kind of swipe it because they're not even paying attention to you anyways. I'm going to move around the room to the S, the steadiness. Okay, now, by the way, the influencer is going to try to get to the back of the room as well. The influencer never, ever wants to be sitting in the front row where the teacher's talking, right? The steadiness individual is going to be front row center. This is the head of HR. See that look on her face? You know what that is? Why are we doing this? Right? Why change? If we change plan providers, I'm going to have to do all the heavy lifting. So we have to have a very subtle communication to the high S, which is those logical reasons for why we're going to do this change, right? And we've got to figure out how to spin a little bit of a message directly to HR that's all about we're going to make this easy for you in terms of the change factor. And even more importantly, how is this going to benefit my participants, right? So there's a strong element of, is this going to be real difficult for my employees, or is this going to be okay? Now we got the D at the back of the room, and the D is all about bottom line. Get to the bottom line right now. Now the D by themselves, there might be somewhat of a perspective of what's in it for me, which might be an interesting conversation about non-qualified deferred comp or cash balance, but we're not going to go there quite yet.
But we're
But
prepared to help our advisors if they do want to go there.
Yeah, exactly. I will share though that there's a secret relationship between the high D and the high C. The D is the king or queen sitting in the room saying, I'm in charge. But the D is also whispered into the C's ear and says, gather all the intel, gather all the information. And then you and I are going to have a little side discussion, right? So of course we've got to get the D some attention, but the real power is with the high C, right? So what do we need to think about there? I'm right, you're wrong, right? So this is the one individual in the room that's really going to be like skeptical of anything coming out of your mouth, right? So although in certain situations they can seem like a little bit of a pain, we've got to make sure to share with them a lot of love and attention, a lot of pros and cons, and the data that's really going to point at a scenario that this change is necessary. Now, what's interesting about the dynamic that might come out of the room is that the D will pull the C aside after the meeting and say, what do you think? And the C will blather off a bunch of details, and the D will ask them, which one would you choose? And the C would just say, like, that's too much for me to do. I can't make a final decision, right? So that ultimate decision is still going to lie upon that high D. So that's I'm kind of sharing with you, you got to show a little love to everybody, but certainly the C is kind of the secret decision maker. You've got the actual decision maker. You got the head of HR that's really going to be impacted, from the standpoint of the actual change, if change exists. You might have that head of sales that's really not as engaged as the others that are in there. So there is a spin around the boardroom.
And that's there's a lot of fascinating stuff here, Randy. This, I'm with you up until this point, and this slide and conversation is where my eyes start spinning like a slot machine. So much to keep track of, and I think the perfect example of how it's an art, and it just has to be practiced over and over again to be able to identify. And then once you know who's in the room with you and where they are, how to work each of them and how to balance the attention that you give to each. So we are just about at our time, but in our last little bit here, one of the big decisions for a boardroom presentation is, I'm the head of sales, I'm the practice leader. Do I go in this alone, or do I bring somebody from my team in with me? How do you address that?
A little bit of a rule of thumb, if you don't want to be absolutely overnumbered, right? So if you have 4 to 5 decision makers in there, going solo is somewhat suicidal, right? If this finals presentation is Bob's Pizza Shop and it's Bob and his wife, go solo, right? It's not a big plan. I'm not saying you're doing a solo 401k, you know what I mean? Is you get in these bigger dynamics, and I really want to think about the boardroom screen that I just put up right now, where all 4 are present. Co-present, bring somebody else with you, but somebody who's not the same personality as you. And that's important, right? I've got to acknowledge that I'm a high I, right? And so where is my weakness? My oil and water is the C's, right? So if I was to go and present, I would find somebody within my firm that has those analytical qualities and have us in there together. And believe it or not, if it ever, it's always, there's always going to be a Q&A aspect to it. If the if the CFO decides to fire off some question, you know what kind of technical question it's going to be, that's where I, as the high, I can kind of turn and say, analytical coworker, do you want to handle this question? And I think that approach, it can lead to a lot more success.
Awesome. Well, I believe that's all the ground we're looking to cover today. What's our final call to action, Randy?
Well, folks, I'd say that your final call to action is take the next step. The next step could be reaching out to us. It could be going into RPAG and find some tools and resources that can help you up your game. Because really, at the end of the day, we want you to win your unfair share of the business. That's what I started with, and that's what I'm going to end with.
Chris, you just popped back on. Any final comments?
No, I just want to thank everyone and thank you guys for the discussion, and look forward to working with you guys down the road.
Awesome. So to just kind of piggyback off of what Randy said, if you've got questions, if there's anything that you would like to keep the conversation going on, feel free to, a lot of folks have my contact information, reach out to me directly. If you happen to have Chris's, you can do that as well. And if not, just call in or shoot an email to support@rpag.com, and our team will get you plugged in the right direction, get you connected with me, and we'll get you whatever you need, get on down the road. So thank you so much for your time, Randy and Chris. Thank you for your partnership and CUNA's partnership, and we will look forward to seeing everybody at this the regional summits in the spring. Take care.